Okay. And so it's a pleasure to be here facilitating this and meeting with you. And I think, Alice, you're just down the road from me, aren't you? Didn't I see you at York University?
Yeah. I just finished an undergraduate there, so yeah.
And are you living close to York?
I'm only about an hour away, but I'm at home at the moment. But yeah, I've just submitted my last piece of work, so I'm completely done now.
Small world, I wasn't expecting it. So if I just say a little bit about me, then perhaps you can all just go aloud and say a little bit about you. I don't know if you actually know each other. Does everybody here know each other? No, not at all. Okay. So yeah, my name's Joan Walton. I'm senior lecturer in the Faculty of Education, Psychology and Language at York St John University, which is in York, is in North England in the UK. I've had a long-term interest in science and spirituality, and my PhD was my own spiritual journey in which I engaged with the challenges of science, in particular quantum physics, and really looked at what it was to understand a kind of transcendent, transpersonal worldview from both a scientific and spiritual perspective. I have worked with the Bhakti Vedanta Institute for some time now. So if any of you want to ask questions at any time, please let me know. So it would be a good idea if we just went round and introduced ourselves very briefly. In order of my thing, Michael, you're at the top left of my screen.
Oh, you want me?
Just a couple of minutes introduction. And how you come to be here. It'd be quite interesting to know how you come to be here and to be part of this group.
I was an undergraduate at MIT. I intended to go into physics. I found it was too hard. So I dropped out and became a physician. I've been a professor of neurology all of my adult life, basically. Up until recently, I'm now emeritus from the University of California, Davis. I am still the chief of neurology for the Northern California VA, but I've always been interested, perhaps as a consequence of my original training in physics, and I was motivated to neuroscience by Warren McCulloch, and the McCulloch-Pitts neurons and the AI approach to these things. So I've always been interested in the mind-body problem, and I have a self-published book on the mind-body problem, and I assume that's how I got here.
Okay, thank you. Linda?
Myself, I did a PhD in chemistry back in '98. I finished it. I did it as a mature student. It was, I developed and built an electronic nose, but I'm now practically an artist. Well, I've come to this through the Krishna being part of the group, really, and was asked just to participate. So totally different from philosophy, psychology, whatever. I've read quite a bit of psychology, philosophy, but I'd say I'm very much an artist now. I'm in the realm of the.
That's great. Thank you. Alice?
So I just finished as an undergraduate in philosophy at York, and I've always been interested in spirituality, so I was interested in the link between philosophy and spirituality and what it can tell us about that. And throughout my third year, I studied consciousness, which was really interesting, and I also did my dissertation on religious experience. I focused it on whether religious experience can justify propositional beliefs about God. And that was really interesting to explore. And in my second year, I got forwarded an email to review one of the books written by the Institute, and I reviewed it and I found it really interesting. So yeah, that's how I'm here.
And can I ask you how in a mainstream university they responded to your interest in consciousness?
I I ended up being very interested in a particular question in consciousness that they didn't cover much. They focused mainly on the mind-body problem and, you know, the gap between it in terms of explaining it, but and they also talked a lot about panpsychism. What I didn't realize was that they also had cosmopsychism, which they only briefly touched on, but I wanted to write my entire essay on it, and he couldn't give me much to read, but I just found my own way with it, and just, yeah, it wasn't one of like the set questions, but it just really piqued my interest. So
well done you for going outside the norm. It takes some courage sometimes, that actually.
yeah.
Krishna Keshava Das, do you want to just say something about yourself as well?
Sure. Real quick before I say something about myself, Alice actually wrote a nice book review for Idols of the Mind. Joan is familiar with the book. She gave a nice write-up about it before we published it. It's on the back of the book, actually. And we've gotten a couple of others book reviews from Idols of the Mind. David Lorimer, Joan, I'm not sure if you know, he wrote a book review also and published it in the Paradigm.
All right.
System Explorer. So real quick before I say something about myself, this is Sebastian Panji. He is...
Hi, Sebastian. Hi. Nice to see you.
Hello.
Hi.
So Sebastian, we just all said something about ourselves. I'm going to go next, and then if you'd like to go after me.
All right, sure.
So I am the assistant to the serving director at the Bhakti Vedanta Institute of Spiritual Culture and Science. Our serving director is Bhakti Madhava Puri. He received his PhD from Georgetown in theoretical chemistry in 1970 and started learning about the Vedic philosophy and later on the philosophy of G.W. Hegel and how these things related and could inform the progress of modern science, which he, was very robustly trained in. So our institute was established in 2012 in Princeton as a nonprofit organization. I've been involved for the last 4 years, helping to, develop some online resources. There was already a wealth of online resources. I'm trying to just add to that, maybe consolidate it a little bit. And this program that we're all engaging in here is happening within the context of how these Eastern and Western philosophies can inform the progress of modern science. So that's all I have to say about myself, really.
Okay. Now we're all, oh, sorry, Sebastian, please go ahead. Just a couple of minutes about yourself and where you're coming from.
All right. Hi, I'm Sebastian. I'm currently a student in Georgetown University, and I am also assisting in investigating the connection between science, religion, philosophy here. And I'm a part, for this Zoom meeting specifically, I am a participant as well as an observer. And so I will be kind of playing both roles in discussing and kind of feeding off information from this discussion too. And yeah, sorry for being late. I had internet problems for these past few days. So if I disconnect at any time, then yeah, I'll try to go back in.
I think we know something about internet problems. I didn't have any sound, and I don't think there was vision. So yeah, it can be a great thing when it works, technology, can't it? But when it lets you down, it's difficult. Okay, well, I don't know if Krishna Keshava Das, you want to say something about the process here. I have come in as a facilitator. We've got 2.5 hours slotted. Whether or not we take that amount of time, I think we'll see that as we go along. I understand that I've seen that your responses to the questions that were sent out to you and your initial response. And my understanding is the idea is that we take each of these questions in turn and have a dialogue about them, and then see whether at the end of it your views, your answers would be any different to what they are now, and that we'll agree some process at the end by which those kind of answers, your responses will be recorded. We are recording this session, but I think that was in the permission consent form that you read and agreed to. So can I just check that everybody is happy about the recording?
Yes.
And so what I want to do is I just normally in these just put aside some very simple ground rules actually. So if I just share my screen for a moment, can I just share those with you so that we don't know each other very well, and you know, we could be getting into some kind of contentious subjects. We don't, you know, it's difficult to predict. So I just always like to do that. So I'm just going to share these with you and just make sure if I can, if I'm not going to worry about, right, I'll tell you what, I'm going to read them out because this is easier. And if any of you are unhappy, you know what, to add to any of it or change them or add any in, but I'm just suggesting we demonstrate respect and non-judgmentality at all times. We're here to discuss beliefs, but in the process of that, people may share personal information, personal experience, and I'm suggesting that any personal information or experience that is shared during these couple of hours should stay within the group so that no one else goes out and talks about anybody else's personal experiences outside the group. That one person speak at a time and avoid just talking over others, avoid interruptions. But that each person should take responsibility for how much they speak, that no one person should speak for very long at any one time. And we're trying to avoid, if you like, soapbox presentations. This is very much about dialogue and exchange of views. And in that context, what takes place in the silence can be as important as the content of the speaking. So if possible, if we can allow a short gap between each person speaking, which just allows time for reflection and for people to think about what's being said rather than just tumble over each other with our different ideas and our views. Are you all happy with that?
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything anybody wants to either add or suggest to change, or are you okay just to go ahead? And I'll facilitate it in the light, this process in the light of those ground rules basically.
Yeah,
Okay.
so as demonstrated, I would like to kind of raise hands when we want to speak so that we kind of know like what order or like when someone wants to speak. Yeah.
Okay. Can we just check? I can't quite see on my screen where to raise the hand.
It's normally on the bottom, isn't it?
Click on more at the bottom right, and then you go to reactions. It should be the last option of the bar.
I've got it. Reactions. Yes, thank you. I've got that. Everybody else got that? See where to raise hands?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Right. Krishna Kashifadas, do you want to add anything in at this stage about what's happened or what you'd like to see happen before we start the first question?
Sure. I'll just give a brief overview of what we did already, each of the participants. We received the initial questions, step 1A, which was just 6 questions with a little bit of suggestion of how to approach the question, and you each gave responses to that. And then upon receiving those responses, I then sent you step 1B, which was a couple of paragraphs to read about the context of some Eastern and Western philosophical views about the question. The idea was for each of you to look at those before coming so that they can also help to inform the discussion in addition to whatever else that you've been exposed to, which is relevant to these questions. This is, you know, a very open-minded dialogue, so we would like everyone to just try to be as, you know, thoughtful, sincere, and honest as possible. And along with the guidelines with Joan very nicely suggested, I think, you know, we can have a very nice dialogue, which will perhaps, you know, perhaps the only goal here is really to expose each of ourselves to something that we had not considered previously, which is relevant to these issues, the mind-body issue, the role of consciousness in science, how possibly modern science can be harmonized with philosophy and also religion. Considering these ideas in this kind of way is productive, I think, and that's why we're here. Other than that, I don't have anything else to add.
Okay, are there any questions from any of you, any kind of clarification or any major point you'd like to make at the outset?
Should I read each question before we start?
I can do that if you like, just
Okay.
as we go along, and then we go move on to each question. I just wanted to make sure that everybody was okay to start then. Okay, so the first question is the information gathered through our 5 senses sufficient to claim that we have genuine knowledge of true reality? Now, I think with its different views in this group, and you're coming from different disciplinary backgrounds and belief backgrounds, so it'd be quite good just to kind of identify some of the differences at this stage. Is someone willing to just... Can
you just define what, I mean, true reality and your perception of true reality? I mean, these sort of written and then I sort of think about it. So what is the perception of true reality when you're talking about it in this context?
So the idea when we wrote the question was each of us has a perspective of reality. We have our individual perspective of reality, but true reality would be that which our individual perspective is being derived from. So from the philosophical sense, there is phenomena, right, which is how reality or things are appearing to us, appearing to our senses. But there's something called noumenal reality. What is reality by itself and for itself, which includes how it appears to us without a doubt, but beyond how it appears to us, it also has, it's for itself, by itself. It's not just what we say it is, something is actually there. So what is that true reality, and how can we perceive it, talk about it, like that?
But I think it's important to say, isn't it, or I would want to, Krishna, about that, is that some people do believe there isn't a true reality. Some people believe that reality is relative to the perspective of the knower. So I think it's important to highlight that for some people, there isn't one true reality. So I think that would play a role in the discussion.
So as a metaphysical question,
yes.
As a metaphysical question, if the topic is the relationship of one's understanding of consciousness to science, if one does not believe that there is, in fact, a simply existential reality, period, full stop, end of sentence, then the topic is dead before it starts, because that is the metaphysical foundation of science, that there really is a world, and that's what it is, period, end of sentence, full stop. So everybody has a right to their own metaphysical construction. But if our topic for this discussion is the relationship of one's understanding of consciousness to science, if there is not an acceptance that there really is a reality, period, full stop, then the topic is dead before it starts.
And I think that's a very interesting point, but many scientists would say that the true reality is primarily material one, and that's probably the issue under debate here. Am I right, Krishna Kashafadath?
So our understanding is that, yes, modern science, especially since Descartes' separation of res cogitans and res extensa, has been primarily concerned with res extensa, matter which is extended in space, and the interaction of these material objects with each other from a very, very small scale to a very, very large scale. So one of the ideas that we're presenting is that you can't separate res extensa from res cogitans. They are two sides of a coin. So there's 3 things going on here, a oneness and difference simultaneously. You have heads, you have tails, and you have the coin, the whole. So you have the extended part, the matter that we're observing, right? The object, you have a thing, and it has being for consciousness. It's there, it's being, and then it has a being for consciousness because we're perceiving that. So it also has being for self. Otherwise, like Dr. Emler is saying, there's nothing that we can agree upon from which science is trying to explain science is trying to explain a reality in a way that everyone can, arrive at by their own application of the scientific method, because they're saying that there is a common reality. We're all perceiving it. So let's try to come up with a methodology where we can all arrive in an objective way about what that reality is. So how can that process neglect the consciousness which is approaching that reality as it is? How can we say that mind and matter are separate when it is this cognitive capacity which is inquiring about that world, which is...
Okay, can I just move that on a little bit and just pick up on what Michael said then again? Because I think your initial point, Michael, was extremely valid. If we don't accept that there's a reality, true reality, then this particular project is a dead duck in the water. We might as well not be sitting here talking. But I think it's what do you feel are the limits to the understanding of that true reality? So science traditionally says that matter is the primary stuff of the universe, and the history of the universe is the evolution of matter, and consciousness came out at a later stage in that evolution. So consciousness is an emergent property of matter, whereas you can have one real reality. If we're talking about what's commonly being known as the post-materialist worldview, you could actually have either consciousness or some kind of intangible dimension, a form of energy that is the primary stuff of the universe, and matter has emerged from that at some stage in the history. So there are many, many different ways of understanding. I mean, the Vedanta tradition has one way of kind of understanding that, but there are many ways of understanding it. And I think the kind of purpose of this is to see what your different understandings of it are, and see whether, as a result of a discussion of this, your views on that might change or move.
I imagine that no one is here who believes that matter is all there is in reality, that reality includes things which are not matter. And one of those things, at least, that is included in those things that are not matter is consciousness. That's why we're here. So if science is defined, I think incorrectly, as simply the phenomenology of matter, okay, then there is a problem of how to extend it to things that are not matter. But in fact, right from the beginning, things were included in the analysis of matter which were not matter. Okay, Newton began with an evaluation of absolute space, and he had a very deeply insightful thought experiment on the nature of absolute space. And then he developed the concept of gravity, which was also not a matter, but was a phenomenology of matter. And so I believe that the issue of consciousness, it relates to science through a deeper and more extended understanding of the phenomenology of matter, which includes the capacity, therefore, to create the existence as a matter of reality of things which are not matter.
Okay, thank you. Can we just perhaps go around and hear from those who've not spoken? Linda, Alice, Sebastian, where you stand on that? If we get everybody's perspective on it or response, we've got a kind of starting point for all of us, really.
I would like to suggest, based on what Dr. Remler just said, if Sebastian, if you would like to speak from the perspective of a student of neuroscience, what is the foundation that they have taught you about reality? is there a reality which is unchanging beyond our subjective perceptions of it? And then if so, do they teach that it is purely a material basis based on material mechanisms, or are they suggesting that there is something beyond that, if you would like?
So what I was like taught so far, I took the gateway class, and so like one of the topics was the five senses, and basically TLDR of how it goes is there's a stimulus from the outside, whether it's chemicals, light, it goes through the sensory organs, your eyes, your nose, and then goes through the nerves, and then it's processed in your brain where you perceive it. And yeah, there's like, and like so far humans have like, well, actually I think we have more than five senses, but the five senses we know, sense, smell, touch, sight, sound, and whatever, is like, it's basically of more practical use than like, let's say, other things, because we can perceive them. There are other organisms that can perceive different shades of color, and there's also this sensory mechanism called magnetoreception, in which some species of birds can detect Earth's magnetic field, and that's something we can't really do. By that logic, considering how long the universe has existed, there could be an organism that has the capacity to perceive like a material matter, like that makes sense, and a true reality. But as of right now, we can't, like, with what we have, we can't really perceive it because we just don't have the mechanism to do that right now. And so, and then there's a question of whether that, like, let's say God, and I'm also Christian, so I think God is like, I think a God may exist, may not exist, but it is a matter of how we perceive it. If God created the universe, then how does God perceive their universe? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Sebastian. Linda or Alice, do you want to pick up on what's been said, or?
Well, the question was on senses really at the beginning, wasn't it? So sort of the question one that we were discussing, wasn't it, on the five senses?
Is the information gathered through our five senses sufficient to claim that we have a genuine knowledge of true reality?
Can I make a suggestion to be careful with the distinction between sensation and perception? Because that is in fact the boundary which is under discussion. Okay, many things can be sensed, but that doesn't mean that they are perceived. And the nature of perception is the topic. What is perception as distinct from sensation?
So are you saying here that is the information gathered through our five senses sufficient to claim that we have genuine knowledge of true reality? And I'm aware that you had a late start and we're moving on, so are we all agreed that it's not sufficient? Is anybody wanting to argue? If you say perception, you know, there may be things like intuition, whereas sensation presumably is five senses. So would I be accurate in saying that people would agree that our five senses is not sufficient to claim?
Yeah, I wouldn't think on their own, just using the senses is sufficient to claim true reality as you define true reality. Yeah.
And I do think that's quite a useful distinction from Michael. So anybody want to argue that five senses is in? Oh, sorry, Alice. Yes, go on. I've seen your hand.
I would just like to, I agree with that. It's not sufficient, but I'd like to add though that although cognitively we're inherently limited in what we can access beyond the five senses, there are phenomena that can be indicated by the senses that indicate that there is something beyond our knowledge is going on. So people, you know, especially religious people, experience many meaningful synchronicities in things that can't be explained by science, can't be rationally explained, but make a lot of sense to the individual and have a profound effect on the individual. Various things in one's surroundings that can do that, and that has a lot of spiritual significance for people. So I think that the five senses and true reality do interact.
Excellent, thank you. That's great. So we're agreed. I mean, I think that's a really important point to make. Would you include experiences like out-of-body experiences in that, or near-death experiences in the kind of things you're talking about, Alice?
Yeah, I would. Anything, you know, any of these things can be easily kind of, you know, dismissed by scientific explanations, but I think that I'm sure there are, I don't know a lot about the brain and the way it works, but I'm sure there are some explanations for why that stuff happens. But yeah, anything like near-death experiences, anything that's
anomalous.
Yeah, and it sounds like, I sound kind of stupid saying this, but anything that's just kind of like out of the ordinary that kind of freaks the individual out or just has any kind of significance to them. I don't know what I'm explaining this.
No, that's great. That's really good. So let's move on to the next question, because I think in your initial responses there was a difference in this actually. Are virtuous personal qualities such as humility and tolerance necessary for the acquisition of genuine knowledge? So who would like to put a shout out for a response to that one way or another?
Can I say from learning myself then, from knowledge, I've always had a quest for learning and knowledge, and that comes basically from a desire to learn. And teaching, when I've taught people, I think when people say, oh, they can't do something or whatever, it's because they're not interested, they don't have the desire. So I say desire is one of the strongest things for wanting to gain knowledge. And
would you relate that closely to motivation? Would that would you put that as being close to motivation?
No, I say the desire comes first, motivation afterwards.
Yeah, no, I can see that. Fine. Any other contributions to that?
Linda, can I ask one question also?
Mm-hmm.
So once somebody has the desire to learn and the motivation to undergo whatever process is necessary for that particular type of learning, then how would either, you know, qualities that are of the nature of vice versus qualities that are of the nature of virtue, how would that affect the process of learning, where we're assuming that learning, we're trying to arrive at the truth of something? We're trying
whatever
to
it is of that particular knowledge that you're looking at or something. I think the desire comes first, then the motivation. I think patience, I think empathy. I think you have to constantly assess what you're learning, you know, because things change as well. I know as a scientist, you sort of put yourself off and you sort of say, okay, right, this is going to be my hypothesis, and you'll set down a method of sort of getting to that, but things change. You have to, and that as well as an artist, you know, you'll start creating something, and it suddenly is not, it's not happening as you expect it to happen. So you then have to adapt. You have to sort of reassess all the time and sort of adapt. Does it taking you somewhere else? And I think it's that growth as well, that it sort of takes you in, never sort of stay stuck, never rigid in what you're trying to do. So the qualities are setting that, so humility, definitely, you know, sort of not thinking you're right in something all the time, but having the strength of character, I suppose, to sort of carry something through. There's lots of things, I think, in you to get to that knowledge, but it is that desire, I think, initially, and keeping that desire that progresses you.
Okay, thank you. Alice, I think you were going to say something just before that exchange, weren't you?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Were you speaking to me?
So, I don't know, but I can't see anyone. Is everybody's okay if Alice goes ahead and that's what she was going to say? Yeah.
Yeah, please.
Well, when I was thinking about the question, I was thinking about I think sometimes when it comes to the acquisition of genuine knowledge, like intuitively, I kind of feel like you have to be sort of receptive for that kind of knowledge. You have to be kind of willing to sacrifice some personal biases and your own like egocentric, like your personal view of things. In order to be able to do that, you need to be virtuous. You need to not be under the influence of certain vices. There's like in ancient philosophy, there's the idea of mediating between the two extremes in order to get to the mean, which is like, just avoiding all extremes, which is kind of like, it kind of sounds a bit like you're avoiding like, just sticking to like one side of the coin, as you were mentioning earlier, like there's two different sides of the coin. But I also, I think it's almost, you can liken it to kind of, if you're religious or if you're spiritual and you think that absolute reality is kind of personal, like it's a God, it's almost as if you're trying to become close to a person. Like you can't become a good friend to another person if you lack certain virtuous qualities, and so you can't gain certain awarenesses of like God or whatever you might believe in, if you're spiritual or religious, if you don't have patience or tolerance or a willingness to understand the other person. Yeah.
Go on, Michael.
Yes. So again, perhaps I misunderstand the entire premise of the dialogue, but if the premise of the dialogue is the interface with science, then the answer is it basically is found in people like Theodore Kuhn and the analysis of scientific revolutions. These are cases in which, from the internal dynamics of science, there is a crisis and one is forced to change one's view. That's what the nature of scientific revolutions. So it doesn't matter really what your external personality, your external perspectives are. What matters is the internal dynamics of it. And when you look, and that's, and so all these personal features are nice, they're helpful, they're good, they make good neighbors, they make good friends, they make good people, but they are quite irrelevant to the internal dynamics of science and the nature of scientific revolution. If you want people to change their mind from the internal dynamics of science, you have to work by the internal rules of science.
So can I just check with you then? Are you saying that you believe it's possible to have a value-free science?
And what science? I missed the key word.
Value-free, that science can be an objective study, that it's possible that the observer exists independently of that which he or she observes, and that you can observe reality, and that the kind of observer or the researcher or the scientist, that they do not influence the nature, that nature of reality being researched. In other words, that a value-free science is possible.
No, I don't think that that's what I tried to say at all.
No, I'm just checking out. I wasn't sure.
Individuals approach it in a variety of ways. Some people have faith, some people don't have faith. Some people don't like the new idea. Some people do like the new idea. Some people have various relationships to all these things. What I am saying is that the aggregate of science, the multi-person, multi-generational, multi-perspective nature of science, which is internally coherent, okay, is the dynamic that must be reflected, which is the reason why Japanese and a whole variety of other peoples all around the world share that internal dynamic. That's what makes it what it is.
Okay, before we pass on to Sebastian, can I just clarify the actual question here? Is, are virtuous personal qualities such as humility and tolerance necessary for the acquisition of genuine knowledge? As I understand it, and you might be going to say something about this, Krishna, but the acquisition of genuine knowledge, we might not be assuming that science, as we practice it, is the only means of acquiring genuine knowledge. Am I accurate in that?
Well, what I'm going to say, I would like to directly address how this question relates to empirical science, the process of that, right? Empirical science, Werner Heisenberg said this, right? He's an established, well-respected, hard-nosed scientist, right, of quantum theory, Werner Heisenberg. Modern science is what we can say about nature, not what nature is in itself. The whole process of science is for an individual to come into this process of many individuals who are rejecting and accepting each other's conclusions about the nature of reality. Whether that means the nature of reality is materialistic or there is more of a cognitive aspect that needs to be analyzed. They're rejecting and accepting each other's conclusions about what reality is. That when they're conducting experiments, they're not just by themselves, they're a part of a team, they have to cooperate with each other, they're harmonizing with a department or maybe not harmonizing with a department, and it's a whole body of interaction. So if there are people who are not able to have these kind of virtuous qualities just on the level of interacting with one another, how can an experiment to even attempt to determine a fact about nature even come about? There's, I mean, it's an entirely interpersonal enterprise. Science, you can't avoid personal interaction. You can't remove that from the facts, so-called scientific facts that are produced from this empirical approach. It's an entire interpersonal process, and whether or not someone is going to be humble and tolerant of other people's disagreements and still be able to come to some middle ground to work together and make the experiment go forward, or whether they're going to be arrogant and just demand that their own way is the only way to move forward and ignore everything else that doesn't agree with them. Those kind of interpersonal approaches have a significant effect on the output of science. That's my personal feeling. What to speak of philosophy and religion?
Can I say something about that?
Please do.
Well, first of all, I think you misrepresent the point that Heisenberg was making. Heisenberg was simply articulating the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, which is that what you would call true reality or absolute reality is not knowable, only the limits of experiment. And at the limit of experiment, you have a probabilistic result, and that's all you can have. You can't go beyond the probability. That is the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics. Your separate point about the capacity of scientists to cooperate, to behave themselves, to accept other people's work, et cetera, is simply correct. There's no one could possibly argue with that. If someone's going to go off headstrong and say I'm right in face of everything else, well, that's their problem. They're just not part of the game.
Okay, thank you. Sebastian, do you want to add anything in there?
Yeah, I think my main response to this question was that is that I think any reasonable person would agree that the scientific method is, well, a method and not not in theory possibly the only method to like figure out what something is. It's just that I think the disagreement comes more with the why something is, and like how it can be used and the practical usages of it. It's example would be like, why does a person get sick? Is it because like God's punishing them, or is it because there is a microbe that is infecting them? It is more practical to assume that the microbe of matter is infecting them because it can be treatable. I think that I see the value in like using the scientific method as it is right now for the sake of like using it more than like it being the absolute know-it-all of what things are.
Okay, thank you. So I think the general outcome of this is that an agreement that virtuous personal qualities are necessary for the acquisition of genuine knowledge, but you've got to separate that out from the actual scientific method itself and what's required to enable science to happen in terms of cooperation. Would that be accurate?
Yes. Almost as if the question is informing what happens after you apply the method. Then you have results which have to be collectively agreed upon to some extent, and that's what's influenced perhaps by such qualities.
Okay, should we move on to the next one then? We can always come back to previous questions later on when we've gone through, but these are progressive. So, is modern science responsible for seeking the truth of reality? I'm just wondering, Krishna Keshav, do you want to just explain what you mean by that question, where that question is coming from?
Sure. I think it will be good if I first, I'll share the screen and show the preamble that was included to this question. Okay, where are we?
I have got it here if you want me to read it out, if that would be easier.
Here, I have it. Okay.
Okay.
So, okay. There is a distinction between the truth and what is true. When a light shines directly on a cylinder, an observer may either see a circle or a square shadow, depending on their angle of vision and which direction the light is coming from. Both the circle and the square are parts of the whole cylinder, so both shadows represent something true. However, neither shadow is the whole truth. Furthermore, when the shadows are considered in abstract isolation from the whole cylinder, and further analyzed as such, only illusory knowledge will be gained. This is because the shadows lose the context of the truth which they participate in when they are considered in abstract isolation. The shadows do not actually exist in isolation. They only exist as aspects of the cylinder, as parts of a whole, from which their essential nature is derived. This is the logic behind the reductionist approach of modern science, which only analyzes nature in isolated parts. Most scientific theories are accepted as genuine knowledge, are only embraced by others because they reveal something which appears to be true about nature. So the question is getting at, are scientific theories or descriptions of nature, what is the intention behind the whole process? Is it to try to actually determine or approach the truth of reality so that we may participate in that reality? Or is the process of science to produce things which help to make the day-to-day life work without worrying about whether it's approaching a more progressive status in relation to the truth? And no doubt that's a very complex question. some people are asking in their responses, how can you know the whole before you can analyze the parts? Or, the idea is that we should at least start to question, what is the whole? Should we try somehow to understand the parts of nature, right? The reductionist approach is just isolating things in isolation. So if we do that without considering the context of what we're doing or what that isolated part is a member of, is that going to give us a true representation of reality, or is it just going to kind of give a comfortable answer based on how we've established the premise of our investigation? I don't know if that was clear.
Yeah.
Yes, I ask you a question. How do you fit into the paradigm of your question, the history of Copernicus? Copernicus took the universal observation that the sun goes around the earth,
Yes.
okay, and by means of an intellectual analysis of data, okay, produce the image that the earth goes around the sun.
Yes.
Whatever you would call that, that's what I would call it.
Yeah. I'll respond very shortly, if that's okay, Joan.
Yeah, and then Sebastian, because he has his hand up, but yes, do go ahead.
Yes, Dr. Emler, what you're saying is exactly, is a great point, because if we're going to just accept what our senses tell us of reality as the truth, then period, end of sentence, the sun crosses the sky. Done, because that's what our senses tell us. The sun moves across the sky. We don't actually observe with our senses the earth rotating. That's only a conclusion we reach through reasoning. Human beings are not even able to reason until they reach the age of reason. When they're children, the mother comes in and out of the room. They think it's a new person every time they come in and out of the room. Only once they reach a certain age can they connect the dots. Oh, it's the same person. Same thing, that same capacity for reason. We know that our house is still there when we leave it. The house isn't in our five senses aren't interacting with our house at all. But through reason, through a cognitive capacity, we understand the knowledge that our house is there, even if we're not seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, touching it, So through that kind of development of how reason can inform us of reality, the truth of reality, through that kind of process, that Copernicus was able to understand a deeper truth about the universe, that actually not everything is revolving around the earth, but the earth is revolving around the sun. But that's something that can only come when we accept that knowledge, true knowledge, is coming from something beyond just the five senses.
Some people still believe that the earth is flat, don't they? Because all they see is that's what they see, and they're trusting their senses. Sebastian, please.
Yeah, so so what I was about to say, this is like sort of more of a practical approach, I guess, but I think before the Industrial Revolution, modern science was like more kind of like true to like seeking the truth and like about like what things are basically. Now with the influence of the Industrial Revolution, with businesses, with like daily lives and maintenance and stuff like that, it's more, I think it's less about maintaining comfort rather than maintaining practicality. Because I personally think that I personally see seeking like ultimate reality as kind of an end goal that can be approached very slowly, although I do not really see the mechanism of how we can approach it with the tools that we have right now. With how we have done things, we have the most practical and usable ways to do things have been to find out the parts first, use them, and then use those parts to find out other parts, and then find a whole. We just don't have a perception of what that whole like really is, if it's like really just more than the sum of its parts. And so like modern science by itself would be responsible for that, but with all the other like ideologies mixed in, it becomes more complicated.
Okay, thank you. Alice and Linda, do you want to chip in here? And
I don't know. I just thought we were on question 3, and it's like we jumped to question 5. It's sort of, I just find it difficult to follow. Like, we talk about something and then it goes on to what's further on or something. So we're not really answering the question that we're dealing with.
okay,
From
you want to have a shot at just answering the one that we're looking at?
to 5, which is the inquiring about reality as a whole or in part. So,
well, it's worth noting that these questions are very much interrelated. So it may be that, you know, we're answering question 3, is science responsible for discovering the truth of reality? You know, talking about reality as a whole versus just talking about the parts, that's related to if science is trying to figure out the truth. So it's not like randomly hopping around, but it's starting to perhaps see that these things are related and can't just be isolated. Nothing is just isolated, it's in a context. And that context relates things that appear to be separate as more of a unity in difference. So they're related. Hello?
Well, no, the whole, but everybody's done different. And part of the thing is that
just that science does look by methodology at looking at different things. Specific experiment, people agree on that, then other people to understand something in that way. Yes, but I just think putting things in boxes, and I think nowadays people are communicating more within different disciplines, I think, so hence something like this, so you're getting a greater understanding. Yeah.
Thank you. Alice?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that. So modern science is clearly concerned with that which is true, which can be distinguished from the truth. But I don't think that the whole or the truth should be, you know, dismissed on the grounds of the aim of modern science being at odds with it. So I think it's clear that modern science, I mean, if it did have that aim or was able to do, you know, if it was able to tell us anything about the truth, it probably would have already at least given us some kind of, but it's just not supposed to. And I think, but I feel like people take that and give it and make that a reason to just dismiss the fact that there is a true reality at all, or that there is a whole picture. And they shouldn't.
I mean, it is possible also, and Linda, you might want to do that, is to comment on the nature of the question if you want it to be altered, because I don't know what this might come through the discussion, and Krishna Keshvadas, you might want to kind of think about that, may be relevant or not. But if I might, I mean, I have read responses, but I haven't got them all in my head by any means, and so I can assure you I could not cover it. But I've just going through, Michael's done a very, very brief response, and if you don't mind if I read it out, Michael, your response to this question, is that okay?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite follow.
I would like to read out your written response to this question. It's very brief, but I think it kind of summarizes what people are saying to a certain extent. So I'm just asking your permission for me to read out your written contribution.
Well, I feel a sense of disconnect, and so I don't see that how to respond to a lot of these questions in the matrix and the meta thought that from which they derive. You know, I mean, no disrespect to anybody, but believe me, but I am a very concrete person who was raised in science, who believes simply that is just true. Okay, end of sentence, etc. And I believe that if you think deeply about this, the example I like to give is a sequence from the Michelson-Morley experiment on the speed of light in multiple directions, which produced special relativity, which produced the atomic bomb. You just can't doubt any aspect of it. I don't see how. And so you have a matrix that is rock solid in my mind, rock solid, not subject to reasonable doubt, not subject to reasonable ambiguity, etc. The fact that it is incomplete, the fact that there are manifestly issues that are not understood is simply true. And therefore, what one wants to do is to ask the question is, how does one expand the internal matrix of science? The problem I have with our discussion here today is that it doesn't seem to work in that order. It seems to work from the outside in, accepting science as some circumscribed area of knowledge, and then one can express a view of it, say it's good, it's bad, it's left, it's right. I don't see that. I see it as simply the rock on which we stand, period, at end of sentence. I don't know if I answered your question, but it's the best I can do.
Krishna Keshapadas, do you want to respond to that? That seems quite critical to why you're bringing us together in the first place.
So it seems to me, Dr. Emily, what you're expressing about the concreteness of science are the steps which have gotten us to create the atomic bomb, right? How could you doubt any part of that process when it has resulted in such a concrete thing, the atom bomb, right? But that whole process can't be isolated from the purposes which it was intended to serve, right? The truth behind the atoms, the atomic structure of the components that went together to make the atom bomb. I don't know what they are. No doubt it's real, right? The atom bomb is real. We can't deny that, and we wouldn't try to. But there is a relationship between the mechanical nature of things, which modern science is currently involved with, which is a very step-by-step analyzing things without understanding the subjective or cognitive influence on those things. So like the science behind an atom bomb can't be separated from the purposes for which that bomb is then going to serve, is what we're saying.
With respect, you're simply right, but I think you misrepresent what you're right about, okay? You are right, period, end of sentence, you're right, okay? You can't take the bomb and the knowledge of science and take, you can't take the bomb and the knowledge of science outside of the outside of its matrix and deny the look. It kills people. They have lives. It has all kinds of things. It has all kinds of significance. I'm sorry about that. It has all kinds of significance that that extend beyond it, and that's simply true. But, and this is the big but, and this is why I'm uncomfortable in this discussion. If the purpose is to build a junction between science and all that stuff that lies outside contemporary science, you can't get from here to there by starting outside. You have to start from inside. You have to start from the power and manifest truth of science in its relationship and then confront its limitations. You can't stand outside of it and say, see how it's failed. It has failed. It's failed to make human beings live moral lives. It's failed in 1,000 different ways. Nobody doubts that. But you can't discuss the interface from the outside in. You must discuss the interface from the inside out. That's the power of science in the modern world.
Then I would follow that up with, from the perspective of standing inside science, how you would then rationalize the origin of science, which came from natural philosophers, Galileo, Newton, right? Newton's laws of gravity.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, that's how I would rationalize it. You got it.
But no, what I'm saying.
We have
Newton said that the gravity and all these mechanical laws are there, right? He's one of the fathers of modern science, but he was a natural philosopher who's saying that there would be so many immense collisions in the solar system, more than are actually occurring, if there was not an intelligence organizing this whole process. And he wrote in his what is that called? One of his main books, Principia, the Principles of Natural Philosophy, I believe. He wrote that Pantocrator, he invoked the personal God as his explanation for the intelligence which prevents the statistical collisions that should happen. If all the mechanical laws are the only influential factor in the solar system, then there should be much more collisions, but there's not. So what is this intelligence that is preventing the chaos from just wreaking havoc? And Newton himself said it's Lord God Pantocrator. You can look at the quote from Principia. And that's this is the context that the modern, the founders of modern science, that's what they were concerned with. And then modern science now has to kind of insulate itself from recognizing that, and has taken only the things that are useful to the way science wants to appear now. But that is not how science emerged. Descartes said,
you're right.
So
Sir, you're right.
How can we?
You're right. You're right. I don't disagree with you at all. But that's not the project that you're interested in. The project that you're interested in is in taking science as it exists today and forcing it to confront the areas that are outside it. I am in favor of, the reason I'm here is because I agree with you completely. I agree with you that that's the problem. I agree with you that that's an important mission, and I support you 100%. But, and this is my problem, but I don't think you can perform that mission in the way that you say. You can perform that mission only from the inside out and not from the outside in. That's why Galileo did say, but it moves, okay? Because he was doing it from the inside out. He was saying, here is a fact inside science that means that your discussion, previous discussion of the interface won't hold. You are right. You are right. You are right. Absolutely. But I think your approach cannot succeed by starting from the outside looking in. It must start from the inside looking out.
I agree.
Can I?
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm just going to step back a moment and look at the process that's happening and just what we think is achievable here, because I think, in all fairness to you, this is the first, Krishna Keshav, this is the first time that this has happened, that we've had this discussion. Yeah. And I think there've been two things that Michael's just said a few minutes ago, that he's felt very uncomfortable and disconnected from this process. And then Linda said, well, you've read what I've written, so I think the kind of it was there. You know what I think. I think the intention behind this is it possible for each of us to move on and shift our ideas and views in the light of what others are saying? Now, I don't know to what extent that's possible, given where everyone's coming from, but just say each of you are coming very sure of where you stand and what your views are. Then in a sense, what we're doing here is just, if you like, each exchanging our perspective without changing them at all. I think at the end of the day, when people go back to their sheets and answer the questions, the question will be, would you all answer them exactly the same as you did before we had this discussion? Or alternatively, is it possible to kind of listen to each other in the light of the viewpoint that we started this conversation, and to think about our own views in the light of what others are saying, and seeing if it contributes to shifting our views a little bit. So, Michael, when you're saying you kind of feel disconnected, I'm kind of, I don't want to, I think we're all the same in some kind of way, but is that because you have a certainty about where you're coming from and what you think about, what you believe, and so you think that's unlikely to change in terms of the conversation? I think that's part of what you're exploring here, isn't it, Krishna Keshava Das? Do you want to come back and respond to that, and just see in the process, say a little bit about what you're hoping will emerge from this conversation?
Sure. I tried to touch a little bit on it when we started, just that the intention is to have this open dialogue, which is no doubt going to turn, it becomes very intense, because we're talking about sensitive things, and we're talking about them in a group environment, people who we're pretty unfamiliar with, and we're still participating, which I think is first a testament to everyone who is participating, to put yourself in a vulnerable position like that. But the idea here is, in that vulnerable situation, in this open dialogue where so many perspectives are being shared that are coming from so many different angles of vision that may not appear to be harmonized or possibly harmonized, what will happen? What will happen to our perspective? Maybe our perspective will only become more firm in our initial conviction. That's a possible outcome. Maybe it will change. That's a possible outcome. Maybe so many things. It's a spectrum, right? This is a spectrum of how we think about reality, about how we understand our own. It's a process of also self-consciousness, not just consciousness studies, but self-consciousness studies. The philosopher Hegel talked about this development in his phenomenology of spirit, where self-consciousness is on the higher level of development of consciousness, from sense certainty to perception to understanding to reason, self-consciousness, and spirit. When we start to reflect on ourself, we're a subject, and we know the world is full of objects, but we can also make ourselves the object to our own investigation. And what happens? That's a very fluid process, we become very vulnerable. So yeah. This is expected, that this kind of intensity comes out, because it's very fluid. And we're just trying to engage in that, trying to expose others to that, trying to engage in that ourselves. And what happens? Is that helpful to our worldview? Is that helpful to how we are living our life and how we are shaping our worldview? What happens? That's the experiment, essentially.
Yeah, no, and I think I understand that at the beginning you said this, but I just think I wanted to revisit it now in the light of, getting partway through, and it's clearly that's kind of clash of views. So sometimes when you revisit it at a different time, you see it in a different kind of way. And for me, the process is a really important one, because in a sense, we're a kind of microcosm of the whole planet, if you like. 6 people with very different views, standing for very different things. And very personally, my feeling is, because, lots of people have their grand narrative and they believe what's happening. My real belief is that unless we learn to collaborate, unless we learn to work together and share ideas about how to manage some of the real crisis that are facing this planet, climate change, environmental damage, terrorism, etc., these issues are going to continue because we just stay very compartmentalized in our own positions. So part of me is that the experimentation of this, I think, is it possible when people coming from very diverse views, and I'm just rewording what you've already said, Krishna Keshapadas, I know that, but I think it's because it's so critical. When 6 people come together, is it possible to dialogue in a way that enables a shift that brings people to a closer perspective at the end in order that to move forward? Or does it simply, in a sense, just confirm for each person the views that they already hold? So I think I would just want to bear in mind the nature of that process. We're not just looking at beliefs and perspectives and answers to the questions. We're also taking into consideration how effective is this kind of process of dialogue in enabling us to learn from each other and to learn different ways of understanding to become more expanded in our perspective. And I don't know whether that's possible either, which I think is what you were saying.
I have a comment.
Please.
Yeah. Again, you are completely right. And the problem is that people inside science and people outside science think that science is much more powerful than it is in terms of the range of its explanation. So that there are people who offer what are really little more than their personal opinions, and they say, this is a scientific fact. Well, it's not a scientific fact if in fact you know enough science to take it apart. And at the same time, there are people out who take perspectives outside science and say, well, since science is limited, therefore you can ignore what it says. So I think you are 100% right, and that is that people have to learn the size of science, the corrugated shape of science, and where are all the 99% of reality that lies outside science. Okay, but that's not meant to negate what I previously said, which is that if you want to discuss the interface, then you have to discuss it from the inside out. Okay, even as you recognize that the range of knowledge that is in fact scientific is an infinitesimal portion of all reality.
All right, thank you. Do you think, Alice, Linda, you've been very quiet. Sebastian, do you want to just...
I just think Michael sort of, from what I gather by listening to him, is he think that the whole project was based sort of on science or something. Now, I didn't have much discussion about it before I was asked to sort of participate in it, but I just took it to be about reality and using science as one part of that, not the whole thing being science. That's sort of how I understand what you said, Michael, that you sort of come from it thinking that it's basically science that we're discussing.
And actually, that you are right, Linda, because the way the way the questions are phrased,
reality, basically,
does allow other ways of getting. Yeah.
I don't know whether, Michael, you had some sort of discussion or understanding about this project before we came to have the questions. Did you?
You are right. I am deeply concerned that I misunderstand the whole conversation.
Right. Yeah. I just think maybe that's the difficulty here, that we've come to it with different perceptions of what we're actually trying to answer. But I just thought it was reality, and science was one aspect of that. But I thought we were trying to sort of take it as a whole. That was my understanding.
Do you want to just give a bit of clarity on that, Krishna Keshapadas?
Sure. And then, well, Alice, do you want to say what you're saying in the context of what's been saying, and then I'll speak after you? Or...
Oh, sorry, I missed your hand, Alice. Sorry about that.
It's okay. I just wanted to say that I do sympathise with the concern that we should be doing things from the inside out. but I think it comes from a very common belief that science is the only dependable thing we have in answering questions about reality. And I think that's where the tension lies, is the distinction between what is conventionally and what has been thus far our most dependable way of answering questions about reality, and the very apparent fact that it's also limited in a lot of ways. And I think that is what's driving the instinct to look at things from the outside in, because when you look at things from the outside in, you can see, oh, there are gaps in what modern science can do. So yeah, you can say whatever you can say.
Thank you. That's great. Sebastian, did you want to say something before we move on to
Who's talking to him?
Sebastian?
Yeah, not much. I was just busy listening to what everyone had to say. I want to say I like how this discussion's going by so far, despite the tension, disconnect, and everything. I think that's why we're all here. We're here to just like see how like science, like philosophy, reality, like how they're all connected, like in different ways and with our different perspectives. I think this kind of dialogue is needed more, and that discomfort that we feel is something that we just kind of have to live with. And yeah, moving on, I think Krishna wants to say something like beforehand.
Just that, so the idea of this is to have what Sebastian is saying. Everyone is coming from a different place, right? Dr. Remler, you're coming from a firmly scientific place. Linda might be coming from a more, so Linda, you've had your background in science and you're also now presently engaged in art. So you're coming from a very different place than Dr. Remler is coming. So based on the perspective of how you're approaching this gathering, it will appear very different. That's the whole idea, right? We're all experiencing a unified reality, and we're all seeing it differently. And that's perfectly represented in exactly what we're talking about. Dr. Remley, you're right. In order to talk about this, it needs to be able to be talked about from science coming towards this more broad arena. From a philosophical perspective, the same can be said. It has to be able to be relevant within philosophy as it is in its current form, and how does it relate to everything else. So we are coming here, I guess, with the fundamental presumption that everything is already connected, even if we don't realize it yet. So the process of this is, how can we uncover that connection? And it might be a rough ride, but it's a part of the process. So maybe it would be helpful, Dr. Remler, if you'd like to talk about what would coming to this kind of discussion from within science look like for you?
Well, at the risk of being self-important, I've explained it as best as I can in a book that I self-published, and I'm not trying to inflict my book, etc., on anybody. But I said it better there than I know how to say it any other time. But there are manifest problems with science at the extremity. For example, the issue came up of the limits, the nature of quantum mechanics, which ends. Steven Weinberg, the Nobel physicist, said everybody knows how to use quantum mechanics, they just don't know what it means. Okay, and this has to do with the problem of the so-called Copenhagen interpretation. That is to say, the Schrödinger wave equation is absolutely correct up until you ask, well, where is the particle? Then it becomes a probabilistic thing all of a sudden, and nobody understands that transition. So there are there are manifest failures, contradictions, crises, whatever you want to call them, in the interior of science at its very, very best. And if you ask where does you go with that, you have to go to issues that you would like, which have to do with the issue of consciousness and things like that. Wigner said there is no understanding of quantum mechanics without consciousness. Okay, Schrodinger said consciousness is absolutely fundamental. It cannot be explained in terms of anything else. So the answer is that there are contradictions and problems interior to science that lead to the question of what lies outside the direct analysis of matter. And those are the issues that open up the question of how to understand consciousness.
Okay. So it sounds like, and please correct me if I'm wrong, you're saying that the problem from inside science, you're going through this process as you've described, and then the problem emerges at some point at the end of the process. You encounter the problem, and you're saying then the conversation with how science relates to reality in a broader perspective is at the point, the intersection of where science and that problem occurs, that problem then.
Yes. So
I would just like to follow it up then with in medicine, right? I mean, you're a physician, and I don't pretend to know anything more than you at all, but like there is this kind of Eastern approach to medicine, which is more preventative, like where when the problem emerges, then when the sickness occurs, it becomes, not too late, but it's much more like preferable to have a preventative approach where what kind of steps, what kind of process is necessary so that everything is being dealt with in a holistic way, and in an isolated problem emerges and then we just treat it symptomatically versus trying to go to the deeper level that it's, a disease is like a systemic thing, and maybe I'm losing what I'm trying to say here. Am I making any sense?
Let me say it for you.
Okay.
You are in possession of truth that lies outside the range of science. That is to say, there are real facts. Meditations produce real effects, etc., etc. These are pieces of truth that lie outside the understanding of science. Okay, and I think you do great work in expanding those pieces of truth that lie outside science, and they are understood in a variety of different metaphysical understandings: Hindu metaphysical understanding, Thomist metaphysical understanding, many other ones. You are in possession of real truth, which lies outside the range of science. If, as Linda said, that the issue that we're here to discuss is the totality of reality, the totality of truth, then I simply have made points that are irrelevant and misdirected, and I apologize. I interpreted the discussion as very much focused on the boundary between the truth that lies outside science and the truth that lies inside science. And my point is that you can't discuss that boundary from outside science. But if the issue is to discuss the totality of truth, of which you are in possession of large pieces that lie outside science, you're to be honored, congratulated, learned from, and any other set of such words you want.
Krishna, do you want to respond to that briefly?
Just very, very briefly. our perspective is that things can't be so compartmentalized in actuality, where science doesn't just exist in a bubble. You know, science is already a part of that greater reality. Science is already a part of that reality. It doesn't exist in an isolated bubble. So to restrict the progress of science to only coming from one direction, especially from when that direction is the direction which the problem is being recognized, but the solution hasn't been found yet. So you can't even then establish what direction should the solution come from. The solution means that we acknowledge there's a problem. We don't know the solution yet. So we have to be open to things that we weren't ready to accept or consider before. So we can't, the idea is that, like, you're saying things like I have accessibility to truth. I don't have accessibility to truth. I'm here to participate also, to learn. And everything that I have learned has come from my teacher, who has learned things that have come from a wealth of different areas. And it's all just a process of trying to understand how the parts in the whole are related as well as different at the same time. We're trying to present that things aren't so compartmentalized. It's not the parts or the whole isolated from each other. It's an integrated reality. We can understand that much, but then what is the meaning and the content of that? What are the specifics? That is what we're trying to deal with. And science and philosophy, if we can come from a place which is trying to consider both of these things, then we may encounter a solution which before we didn't have access to. So I guess all I'm trying to conclude with is it would be better maybe if we don't try to restrict the direction that the solution is supposed to come from.
And I think I would like to move on, because I think we want to hear everyone a bit more, but I think I would sum that up by saying it is a kind of ontological view of the world, and my way of phrasing it is to say that separation is an illusion, and quantum physics says that all of reality is entangled. So I think that kind of, you know, you can freeze frame things for a purpose, but that's not actually portraying the nature of reality. Again, would Alice, Linda, or Sebastian like to comment on any of this, make a contribution to this conversation? Or should we move on? I'm aware I did say to Krishna that we'd probably be finished well before 9:30, and I'm aware we've only covered 3 questions. I think the next one's going to be relatively, at least I hope it's relatively straightforward, but perhaps Alice or Linda or Sebastian would like to comment on what's being said before we move on.
I feel my point of view being changed already. I kind of
thank you, Alice.
Before going into this, like thinking about the questions, I was very much thinking, okay, so modern science and true reality, they must be completely separate, and they can't really interact without limiting either one in certain ways. But hearing what's just been said, it really does make sense that things can't, like, in actuality, exist in a bubble, and that it is limiting to restrict certain areas. And that's, yeah, like the idea that separation is an illusion and everything, that's actually, that's a bit eye-opening, I think, from like, because initially I was looking at the questions from the lens of things are separate, and I didn't even think about the fact that things are connected in certain ways. So yeah.
And quantum physics does support that, because it basically says that, you know, uses that word entanglement, that reality is entangled. And Linda,
yeah,
would you like, I mean, feel free to say not now, past.
I don't think I've altered my way of thinking in what I've heard. It hasn't, because I think quite open, and I like to listen to people's perspectives and get an understanding of, but it is understanding, and I think it is all connected. I think it's all the separate parts that make the whole. And if we look at it separately, we only have separate knowledge. So, and it is, I think it's moving forward. I've noticed it in the last few years, as I say, that the interdisciplinary, you know, different things are starting to talk to each other and open up and sort of, so I think that's a step forward.
I think you did say that
I'm
things
hoping
were...
from this, that it's a step forward, that it, you know, by listening to people's different points of view and everything, that there's going to be some sort of communication that will sort of help to understand reality, total reality, I suppose, even more.
And I think you did say earlier on that things, you know, interdisciplinarity was increasing, if you like, getting greater. And I don't think you can have more of an interdisciplinary than you do chemistry and art, do you? So if you manage to integrate those...
You know, because people always say that, you know, if you're a scientist, they seem to think that the arts world is very different, and it's not.
No, but that's what I mean. You're proving your point. I think that's what I'm saying.
You have to be a creative to be a good scientist. You can't sort of think, and you've got to creatively think in order to sort of find new information, to sort of, you know, prove theories and that. You have to be creative. If you're stuck in the box, in my opinion, you're not a good scientist. You know,
but I think if people understand that principle, that actually chemistry and art do complement each other or go together or integrate, then the principle of what you're talking about.
Yeah, you're using chemicals. You know, sort of that's what you're using, but in a different way to portray something different. But you're actually using chemicals in order to make something. So there's that whole process of that there as well. No, they are.
Right.
I think both are very creative. Both are very much related to thought, mind. You know, so yeah.
Excellent. Sebastian?
Yeah, I think I would just like to say that, like, as entangled as every like component of reality is, it is not necessary that they all live in harmony. Some ideas will clash, some ideas will slide against each other, some ideas will just not interact at all. And I think like to understand that all of those components, all that disharmony, harmony, like they're just all part of like one reality. And it's just, I think, good that we are not afraid to face that in this discussion.
Excellent. Thank you. Shall we move on to the next question? And I'm predicting this will have a fairly straightforward response, but I could be wrong. Do mind and matter have a dependent or independent relationship with each other? Who would like first shot at that? We should just go around very quickly and just say one or the other or both, but and see where we stand.
Can I actually ask a question to the group? So, I mean, based on everything that has occurred already, do each of you have an interest in responding again? Because the initial idea was to write, you know, to have the last half hour of this. We're in the last 40 minutes of what we designated, you know, and are you interested in writing another response? Do you think it would be beneficial as far as explaining what you may have learned one way or the other about this process? Is that something that you would think that would be useful, or you think, you know, it wouldn't be so useful? It would probably be the same thing you submitted already.
Do you think it's useful for whatever response you get from us, whether we've changed our opinions or not? You're leading this research, I mean, and you've asked us questions, and then we've had the discussion. So do you think it's going to be useful? Do you want to know?
Yeah.
Each thing. We've committed ourselves and said that we'll do this for you, you know, sort of.
I think it would be good if everyone feels that they have something new to contribute to the response. So that's why I was just checking if people feel they have something new to contribute to their response. And if so, you know, we can wrap up in the next 10 minutes and still designate that last half hour to writing, if that's okay with everybody.
Michael, what do you think?
So was that asking me?
Yeah.
I have enjoyed the personal validity of all of you. I have enjoyed the strength of personal character, that you sustain what you believe on the basis of what are clearly strong humanistic characteristics, and that I've enjoyed and that I admire. But if the question is as to the intellectual question, the answer has to be no. I don't think that I've seen anything that has changed my mind or that is capable of changing my mind about the intellectual question. Again, each of you are, in your own way, very impressive to me personally, but the subject matter is not flexible under these parameters.
Would Alice or Sebastian like to say anything about that?
I'm quite enjoying like verbally talking to everyone, and like everyone just kind of bouncing off of each other in that way. Maybe if like we all got through the questions and then after it was over, then just resend you the questions as though like just in our own time, maybe. But also we could just do the what you suggested. I think it's quite, I quite enjoy, I just quite like the discussion.
Having the opportunity, it's not very often you get these chances, is it, to talk to people in a, I mean, I think you're being, you're taking a wonderful approach, Michael, because very often people get so caught up in their own views that they don't acknowledge the kind of qualities of the people and respect the people who are involved in the dialogue. And I think it's really important to separate these out, that you can have a lot of respect for who people are and what they're saying and where they're coming from, but not necessarily agree with the content of what they're saying and feel able to say that. So I think you stated your view very nicely and very clearly. But I think from Alice's point, the conversation itself is relatively rare to have this opportunity. And if people were prepared to, they could write afterwards about just any changes or any additions that they'd like to add.
Sounds good.
Linda?
Yeah, no, I'm generally in agreement with like just keeping like the discussion for like the last half hour and then send the questions afterwards, because I think like the questions just serve more as like a reflection than like an actual like self-discussion based thing.
And I guess, Krishna, perhaps you clarify that. Do you want people to respond to each question, or if they just did a general reflection on this conversation, which referred to the questions as they are seen to be relevant, would that be sufficient for you?
That sounds much more natural. Yes.
So just a reflection on the overall experience of this conversation and use the questions as a guide to structure that reflection.
That would be great, yeah.
Okay, so then we come to, do mind and matter have a dependent or independent relationship with each other? And I'm just wondering if there's anyone in this group of six of us who thinks that mind and matter exist independently of each other. Perhaps we start there. Does anyone believe that mind and matter exist independently of each other?
I do.
Right?
Yes. Period, end of sentence. Yes.
Anybody else?
I would like to share a quote, if that's okay. If you just give me 1 minute, I'm sorry.
So while you're looking for that, can I just ask you, Michael, as clarification? So do you think there's a kind of reality called mind that could just exist without there being any matter? And you think there's a kind of quality or of something called matter that could exist on its own, and it's somewhat by chance that the two coexist in the same reality?
So let me quote Erwin Schrödinger, who incidentally was a great fan of Hindu theology, but nonetheless a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, a very deep thinker. Consciousness cannot be accounted for in physical terms, for consciousness is absolutely fundamental. It cannot be accounted for in terms of anything else, close quote.
Okay, Krishna, have you got your quote that you wanted to share?
Yes. This is the one that we discussed before by Werner Heisenberg from his Physics and Philosophy, The Revolution in Modern Science, Chapter 5. He says, "We cannot disregard the fact that natural science is formed by men. Natural science does not simply describe and explain nature. It is part of the interplay between nature and ourselves. It describes nature as exposed to our method of questioning. This was a possibility of which Descartes could not have thought, but it makes the sharp separation between the world and the I impossible. If one follows the great difficulty which even eminent scientists like Einstein had in understanding and accepting the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum theory, one can trace the roots of this difficulty to the Cartesian partition. This partition has penetrated deeply into the human mind during the 3 centuries following Descartes, and it will take a long time for it to be replaced by a really different attitude toward the problem of reality."
Amen.
The reason I wanted to give the full quote of that is because before it was just kind of dismissed as only relating to the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum theory, but I think we can understand that's not at all how limiting Werner Heisenberg made this statement. We just heard the direct quote. He's saying that only the difficulty which came in understanding the Copenhagen interpretation, that was one manifestation of the broader problem, which is throughout modern science as a whole, because of this distinction, which began with Descartes' separation of mind and matter. So,
Can I ask you, Michael, for clarification? This is clarification again. If what you said a moment ago is that you believe you see consciousness as existing independently of matter, yeah. Does that mean you think that it's possible for matter to exist independently of consciousness, or do you think matter has emerged from consciousness?
I am a dualist, period, end of sentence, okay? But, and I think this is the critical issue, if you, I believe that the significant issue which bedevils people is the interaction between consciousness and matter, okay? This is articulated best in a philosophical way in the book by Sir Karl Popper and the Nobel Prize-winning neurophysiologist John Eccles. Now, there are particularities of their perspective which I don't share, but their emphasis on the interaction between consciousness, as they put it, the mind and its brain, is, I think, fundamental. And what bedevils people is how to understand the interaction between a non-material consciousness and a material reality, a physical reality, both of which are true, as you would have it, pieces of true reality. They are both exist in the absolute sense of the word, and they interact profoundly.
I would just ask, what evidence is there of matter existing without consciousness observing?
Krishna, before we get into that, because I'm just aware other people haven't said, can we just get a kind of sense of where other people stand in this debate? And so I suppose I'm asking the question, Michael's very clearly said he's a dualist. Is there anybody else who's equally a dualist in the way that Michael is saying, or who would like to kind of present a different perspective? Alice, you look like you're about to speak.
I just struggle with I struggled with this when I was studying consciousness at undergraduate, so I went into it being a dualist, and then I was exposed to a theory that kind of seemed to, although it's a little bit kind of, it's difficult to explain and like wrap your head around, it does seem to kind of provide some kind of answer to the concerns that I had as a dualist of trying to figure out whether or not I was one. It's the idea that our universe is fundamentally constituted by a universal, like a unified consciousness. Everything from that that exists arises, including matter. So, and it the theory talks about how matter is just kind of consciousness, that consciousness in a denser form, and that we all have our own individual consciousnesses and our own characteristic forms, in virtue of the fact that that characteristic form just persists over time, and that's the only reason. And so technically we're not separate, but that's a big theory and it takes a while to explain, so I'll just kind of...
From the little that you've said, it sounds very, very close to my sense of reality as well, so I think I'm with you, actually. Linda?
No, I think it could be both. Normally dependent on each other, I think, but I think I pointed out, I think it's what they're doing nowadays. I suppose, what would be...
Are you a dualist? I think that's what I'm trying to get to. Would you say you're a...
It's a case of somebody that is what they would classify as brain dead, who has had brain damage and their mind is not functioning and the body's just there.
I would equate that to a broken radio.
So that
it doesn't mean that the airwaves aren't there.
Exists without mind, then?
Pardon?
Wouldn't that sort of say that matter exists without mind, then?
Right. Okay, so you're a dualist. I don't know we can get into all the technicalities. I do accept the argument. I do accept the debate completely, but I'm thinking I'm the facilitator, and to get into response to that, just let's get Sebastian to say where
you're saying that it could be both. I thought that's what you started with. You said something about it could be both. Maybe I misheard you.
Well, I think with the work that they're doing now, they see that the mind and matter are working together, aren't they? So,
but that's a dualist view. That's saying that mind exists, and I mean that sounds very similar to what Michael's saying.
Is that a body where the mind's not working, but the matter still exists.
The reason I asked if that was what you said was just to clarify the point that it's not just a metaphysical battle between non-dualism or dualism.
Yeah.
It's not just one or differentiation.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole project of Hegel, and from Plato, Aristotle, Kant, our dialecticism started from Plato, and Hegel developed it massively. Dialectic is the oneness and different simultaneously, that they cannot be separated, that it's not just one and duality is an illusion, or that it's just a multiplicity and any kind of unity is an illusion. You know, dialectic is based on the fact that unity itself implies that there is a differentiation, a multiplicity, which is being unified. So to say unity, you already imply dualism.
Yeah.
And to say dualism, you're implying that there's one thing which has two aspects. They imply each other. So just
that's different. That's the kind of heads tails analogy, isn't it? Metaphor.
Well, heads and tails are two parts of a whole. The idea is that It's not
But
just
they're not
one or the
separate.
other.
They're not separate.
They're not, well, they are. A head and a tail is different. Like the negation of tail is heads, and the negation of head is tail. The negation of duality is non-duality. The negation of non-duality is duality. But negation doesn't mean annihilation. It doesn't mean nothingness. Something is there. The annihilation produces something, a third element. It's not just one or the other. It's a process. This is what Hegel is presenting, and this is also part of what the Vedic philosophy is presenting, that it's not, you can't just say one or the other. It's a differentiation. Matter and mind are completely separate, or that matter and mind are just one thing. No, the difference is real.
There's a differentiation, but yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a whole new way of thinking, to be honest.
No. I think I'm not against that, but there is not a separation. Would you still agree with that kind of concept that separation is an illusion? Ultimately, I don't mean the kind of distinctiveness of, our unique existences, but in terms of ultimate reality.
Yeah, I would say in terms of ultimate reality, separation is an illusion, but difference is not an illusion. Difference and separation aren't the same thing.
No, I don't accept that.
Yeah. So
I mean, one metaphor would be the wave and the ocean.
Yeah.
They're in one sense they're the same, and the other they differentiate. Sebastian, have you got a view on this?
I honestly have a pretty hard time thinking about this, because I would see like the mind as, like, on one hand, mind can exist as its own entity, but it cannot exist without a body, like, together. But also there's the case that, like, the mind, or our perception of what a mind is created by neural connections. And, like, that gets into, like, can we transfer consciousnesses between different bodies? Can we create a consciousness, which we are not even close to doing? And so I overall, like, I'm pretty conflicted.
You're pretty what?
Conflicted here.
I don't think they're mutually, they're different. I think this could be an example of where we're saying similar things, but just saying them in different ways, actually. I think it depends. I think one of the big debates, I'm not necessarily saying we should go into it now, is perhaps what's primary, is consciousness primary or is matter primary? And is traditional evolutionary theory says that consciousness is an expression of matter, that it's emerged from matter. But anyway, we have got 20 minutes and 2 more questions. Unless anybody desperately wants to add anything to this. I mean, I guess this is where, if any of this is triggering thoughts and ideas from you, this is where people could write them out afterwards, isn't it, Krishna? That if anybody here thinks this has triggered off a way of seeing things that they'd like to write about, you'd really welcome that.
Absolutely. Yes. Before we end in 20 minutes, if also everyone can just send their best email address in the chat here privately. I'm not sure if I have everybody's email address. Some people I only dealt with on Facebook. If that's okay.
Right. Would an intellectual approach, which begins by inquiring about reality as a whole, before trying to understand the parts of reality, be relevant to modern science and scholarship in general? Now, I know you've already read this question and had a shot at answering. Does anybody want to just go first on where they stand with that at the moment?
I personally think, in theory, it would. It's less of would it be, like, relevant, more as, like, can it be done? Because, like, we don't actually know, like, what a true reality, like, looks like as a whole. We don't even know how to, like, perceive it. Like, with the tools that we have right now, we can only, like, really do so much, and, like, really look at the parts from like the inside out. because we do not know what the outside looks like, and we have like not really a way to perceive it either.
Okay. Thank you.
With this question, I think it might be important to point out that a common approach to conceptualizing the whole may be very much based on a physical approach, where we're thinking that the whole is something in time and space alone. So it's hard to conceptualize a whole, meaning, you know, the totality of all matter, of all of the whole universe or universes. But the idea is that the whole is not just physicality, that it also includes every other dimension of our experience, such as cognition. So, you know, just to highlight that it's not necessarily, you know, just a physical approach to what is a whole, just a thing, but one other element is that cognitive element, and, you know, that's a part of the whole too.
So again, I think it's worthwhile to make a distinction between very, very narrow definition of materialism, that is, the only thing that exists is matter, and what you might call a more generalized physicalism, that is to say, a scientific physical approach to things that include things that are not matter. And again, I don't want to push it on anybody, but I work hard on it in my book to say that with the concepts of energy and things like that, science has in many occasions accepted the absolute existence of pieces of non-material reality. Newton spoke eloquently about the real existence of empty space. If that's not coming out in favor of the existence of non-material reality, I can't imagine what is. So again, I think it's important not to confuse a narrow definition of materialism, all that exists in reality is matter, and a more expanded physicalism, which is that one can understand a wide variety of things that exist which are not matter.
What would an example be of a physical understanding of something which materialism rejects?
Well, two of the best intellectual example I can give is the issue of caloric in classical thermodynamics. Before special relativity merged the understanding of matter and energy were understood separately. And Carnot, the greatest of all people in thermodynamics, did his thermodynamics believing in the existence of caloric. And caloric was a non-material substance that caused temperature, okay? So I am at great pains to say that there is nothing incompatible with the metaphysics of science for the existence of non-material entities. Let me take this one opportunity to apologize. I'm actually going to have to leave in a couple of minutes because I have to get my blood drawn. So I apologize.
Does anyone else want to talk quickly to this one, or do you want to spend the last 5-10 minutes or so on the final question? Krishna, what do you want? Where do you feel the priority lies in terms of what you want?
As long as no one has anything very important to add to this, maybe we can move on.
Just to point out what Michael said, it just brought to mind when I used to do experimentation and everything, and because I used statistical analysis and I was looking at signals from sensors and that, and anybody that uses analytical equipment, what it brought to mind was that the bit you couldn't explain, we call noise. Like we call it noise. You know, when you're doing experimentation and you're writing it up and what you can't account for, you call it noise. So that's just brought to mind that it's not matter. You know, from a scientific point of view, for that was all. Yeah, noise. That's what you can't explain. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you, Linda. Final question. Is it more rational to conclude that life comes from matter, abiogenesis, or that life comes from life, biogenesis? Anyone got strong feelings about this right at the outset?
Only that we're all made of chemicals, but it's not been proven that you can make life from the chemicals on its own, that's all. So, you know, the argument's there because we are made of chemicals. Why can't we make life from that by putting those chemicals together? You know, we've got to break it down and we know what it is, and there's that unknown quantity that we haven't been able to yet pick up on to make these chemicals come to life.
It's a really important point, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Anyone else? So you're a believer in life coming from life? Does that lead you to believe that life comes from life?
I think we only know that life comes from life from what we've done. That doesn't mean that it does. I'm open. I just think just because something's proven now doesn't mean that's the way it is. Just because we don't have the knowledge in order to.
So with respect, I would say that the question is poorly formulated. In this question, is a virus life? Is a protozoan life? What is life in this is a plant life? I don't think the question is well formulated.
Sure.
Have you got a clear definition of that, Krishna?
Yes, so life would be from, biological organisms down to the smallest cell, where there is a single entity who is having a dynamic relation with its environment to perpetuate its own existence, right? From the cell up the ladder of complex life forms, they're all engaging in anabolism, catabolism, and metabolism, right? They're simultaneously taking from the environment. They are sustaining their own integrity as a living entity, and they're also deteriorating. So anything that's alive is engaging in these three processes. They're taking from the environment to sustain their own individual being. They are also giving to the environment in what is being, what is leaving that entity, and they are maintaining themselves through their own process. Now, when life is no longer there, that maintenance is no longer occurring. When cell death occurs, it's no longer able to undergo mitosis. It can't reproduce, and it can no longer take from the environment, whatever the context of the cell might be. When it's a dead cell, it can no longer interact with that environment and sustain its own integrity. When a lion is dead, it can no longer engage with its environment. So life.
What about a prion or a virus?
A virus is something that is a virus. A virus, and does it undergo metabolism, catabolism, or anabolism? I'm asking you as a doctor. I don't actually know. Does a virus undergo those three processes?
Well, the question is, what is the it in that sentence? When the virus is in control of the cell, that's the totality of the cell with the virus is doing that. I don't think you would say that the virus itself engages in the anabolic and anabolic or catabolic activity, but it controls it in the cell that it inhabits.
So that
You know, you'll have to forgive me, sir, but I gotta go. I mean no disrespect, but I apologize. I have to go.
we appreciate your participation very sincerely, Dr.
Thank
Emily.
you.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Nice to
Bye-bye.
meet you.
Namaste.
Nice to meet
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Thank
Thank
you.
all of you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, so to add to the virus thing, like I think generally it is accepted that viruses do all those things in a host cell, but on its own, it generally is known to not be able to do that. And so that's where like the argument, like where does life start, becomes unclear with those things, with the virus especially.
Based on that, then from the intention that we had when we wrote the question, a virus would not be considered alive then. You know, when somebody becomes angry, that anger influences them in so many ways. That doesn't mean anger is alive. It's just something, I mean, not that anger is a physical thing anyhow, but it's something that will influence something that's alive. A virus is something which can influence something which is alive, but it's not alive on its own. That would be our interpretation of life.
I don't know. I'd say it was alive. Like reproduces, doesn't it? Reproduces. It changes. It adapts.
But does it only do that once it's in a cell? I know nothing. I'm ignorant in this
I don't know
completely.
that it does. It reproduces in the cell, but I'm not sure where it changes, because you get, just like the COVID, haven't you? That as a virus or something. Does it change within the person and it changes into something else? Or is that when it's transmitted? I don't know. But it reproduces, doesn't it? It's the whole thing, and it adapts. It's like one of the probably most robust systems.
Louis, I think Krishna, you've got a very clear definition. I think obviously there's 2 or 3 things on a borderline that would need following up, but I think you've got a clear definition of the difference between life and non-life, which seems to just have, you know, be throwing up a very few question marks, which may very well be resolved.
One of the cases, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry, John.
No, go on. That's fine.
So my personal perspective is that biogenesis is true in a very clear way, in that we only ever observe life coming from other life, right? From the cell to the organism. Never has life come from non-life in a natural way or in an experimental way in the lab. Linda, you were touching on this before, that, you know.
I was just saying that all life is made up of chemicals. It's chemicals which are classified as inorganics. Yes, they're not life in themselves, but when they're put together. So when the experimentation we've done, and we are really quite naive, and we're not that knowledgeable in science or whatever, and all the time technology advances us and we find out different things all the time. So I'm just saying that for what we know at the moment, we can reproduce life from life. Say in a lab, we can do that. We can make things from life. But life is made from inorganics, which are non-life. So there's something extra. So it's possible that at some stage you would be able to put those inorganics together in the way that they are and find out what that extra thing is and add it to it.
Just to clarify, actually, in the lab, life has never been created. You know, we have to be very careful about how to approach this. Anything that's ever been done as far as cloning or creating DNA within a cell, and then the expression of that cell changes, is already being conducted in things that are living because they came from natural life.
Yeah.
But so the very subtle distinction, which is a huge point, is that never have you created a living cell based on putting chemicals together.
No, that's what I say. Not as of yet, we haven't. But that doesn't mean it can't. In my mind, it doesn't mean it can't be done.
Right.
So, Alice,
we are at the moment.
The additional thing then to consider would be that matter itself, no doubt we have chemicals in our body, right? But so where is that matter coming from? The observation is that matter would also be coming from life, because you need the life to produce another life. And then when the life is developing, right, an organism develops as a whole. It's not like different parts are manufactured outside of the whole and then put into it like a robot, but an organism develops as a whole. All of the chemicals that constitute the body of a living entity develop in their relationship to each other as the whole organism develops already alive. So that's a process that's resulting from life.
Okay, Krishna, can I just hold it there? Because I think your point is clear, and I think Linda's not necessarily disagreeing. She's just saying the fact that it's not happened to now doesn't mean to say it won't happen. And we're getting very close. It's past. I don't really want it to go beyond because people have been on for a long. Alice, you wanted to add something here.
I just wanted to suggest that the missing ingredient, like to the chemicals, is consciousness, right? So, well, you could say it's consciousness. I don't know whether you'd be able to create that in a lab, though. So I think thinking, where does life start? Where does it end? I think it all comes down to consciousness. So
if you come from a worldview that says that consciousness is primary and we are expressions, we are embodied experiences, of consciousness, we are small c of a consciousness that's a big C, that is one way of doing it, then whatever inanimate forms you've got, consciousness comes in and makes is living from, essentially. I think that's what you're saying, isn't it, Alice?
Yeah.
So there's lots of different perspectives there, isn't there? I think, and there's been a real richness, I think, in the dialogue, lots of different ideas coming around, and you probably want to add, Krishna, but I think if any of you would just go away and in the light of this, reflect on this conversation, and particularly reflect on perhaps which of your ideas that you feel have just been affirmed here, or which you feel that it's made you think something. You've not necessarily come to a conclusion, but it's just made you think a bit differently. And then if anything's actually shifted your point of view, to be included in that reflection. Is that an accurate summary, Krishna? Do you want to just close and end off, really?
I think you summarized the next step perfectly, and all I can do is express my gratitude to everyone here for their very valuable contribution, and that's all I can really say. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Hopefully we can continue talking through one avenue or the other, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thanks very much, everybody. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Hope to see you all again sometime.
Thank you for putting it together then.
Well done, Krishna. Bye.
Krishna.
bye.